Autism is not an excuse for bad behaviour at work. Look, we all know that the working environment can be a hostile place for neurodivergent individuals. I've faced my fair share of challenges, from trying to figure out the overcomplicated social rules, the overstimulating environments, and the cycles of burnout. And in order to survive for the majority of my working life as an undiagnosed autistic person, I adopted a series of subconscious behaviours to survive the environment. I've masked using humour and people-pleasing. I withdrew from many situations because they were too much. I've opted out of a traditional job because I can no longer cope with the politics and the overstimulation at work. But more than anything, I have mirrored the behaviour of others, especially when it comes to the social parts of the workplace. And I can only say that in hindsight because I was doing it automatically, subconsciously, trying to follow those unwritten rules, not realising what others seem to automatically know where the line stops. Does any of that resonate with you? Have you ever found yourself just mirroring behaviour so that you could keep up with the social aspects of work? Let me know in the comments. If you did, you're not alone. If you've seen the title of this video, you will know that I was inspired to make this video when I saw a whole bunch of headlines about this guy, Gregg Wallace. He was a presenter on the show MasterChef, which is a BBC show, very popular here in the UK. And it was recently announced that he had been banned from working from the BBC altogether. Statement included this sentence: Gregg Wallace has been banned from working at the BBC after the corporation ruled it was not safe to have him in the workplace. This had followed an investigation that had found that he'd made inappropriate jokes and made others feel uncomfortable due to overly sexualized comments. There were also reports of bullying and humiliation. What if I now tell you that after digging a bit deeper, I think that there is a lot more nuance in this conversation than the headlines might make out. And in some aspects, I think I might understand where Wallace is coming from. I'll go into more detail on that as we analyse this situation further. But I want to also be incredibly clear that I absolutely never think it is okay to use sexual language in the workplace, nor do I think it's okay to embarrass or bully anyone in the name of humour. In the letter of dismissal to Wallace, Claire Powell, who's the BBC's head of compliance, said, "I have also taken into account whether your behaviour could be improved with training and/or coaching. I do not have the confidence that you can change what seems to be learned behaviour for you to make what you perceive to be jokes in the working environment without understanding the boundaries of what's appropriate." I've got to be honest, this statement really hurt my heart. Not necessarily on the behalf of Gregg Wallace, but because this highlights what many autistic people are questioning about themselves every single day. Can you imagine reading that from your boss, that they don't believe that you can learn, that your behaviour is baked in? Tell me how you'd feel getting this letter, because this is something that I really think about a lot, even before all of this came out. Are there things that I just can't change? Or do others perceive that there are things that autistic people can't change and therefore they're not going to give anyone a chance? Look, I am not suggesting in this case that anything said in that letter was wrong. I don't know the background information here, although I've dug into a lot of information and we're going to go into that in a minute. Many things do suggest that Gregg Wallace has shown repeatedly that he's not about growing and learning, he's about placing blame on other people, and we will go into that in a lot more detail as we go on. And the thing is this: Gregg Wallace talked about his autism in the same statement where he was kind of trying to justify his behaviour. He was responding to the report and what it said in the report. And in this report, of course, it mentioned many counts of inappropriate sexualized behaviour. What happens then is it's immediately putting autistic people into that bracket of unable to act appropriately in the workplace. Add the letter on top of that, and you're saying autistic people don't know how to act appropriately in the workplace. Oh, and they probably don't know how to change and grow and learn. And we know that that's completely false and incredibly damaging to all the other autistic people, many of whom really struggle to get any kind of work. And honestly, based on the headlines I've read, I would forgive people for thinking, oh, autistic people act inappropriately at work because they've developed coping mechanisms and learned behaviours, and there is no confidence that we as autistic people can learn and change. What if my future employer or your future employer started to get those messages? They might just be skimming the headlines and thinking autistic people are more trouble than it's worth. And what if you are an employer, somebody who's got the wrong end of the stick, and subconsciously now you're thinking, I'm probably just going to steer clear of autistic people, and they're probably going to group all neurodivergent people into that package as well. Hashtag not all autistic people. Quick pause, if you're neurodivergent and you want us to be seen for who we are and not for who the headlines want to make people believe we are, then drop some love in the comments. Let me know what you're going through and how this situation has made you feel. Now, I do need to bring up here that Gregg Wallace has also said, I want to make it absolutely clear that I'm not blaming my behaviour on my diagnosis, but it does explain a hell of a lot for me. And I think that that's something that all of us who've had a diagnosis can understand, that we look back on certain things we've done, certain things we've said, and gone, maybe I wish I didn't say those things, or now I understand what was going on there. You're not excusing it, you're saying I'm understanding it now, and from that place of understanding you can develop and grow. So, I want to use this video to explore the MasterChef saga, to explore what this situation can teach us, both as individuals experiencing and navigating autism in the workplace, and how organisational culture needs to change to help all people work safely together. Let's get into it so we can see why autistic people are terrified of stories like this, and why employers might be getting it dangerously wrong. So, we're going to start by looking at a timeline of the story. It's time to settle in, grab yourself a cup of tea, because this is a brief history of the MasterChef saga. Now, MasterChef was first aired in 1990, back in the golden era. This is when I used to watch MasterChef, with the fabulous Lloyd Grossman. You may know him from his Sources. And that show was on the air for a few years during the 90s. Then it was rebooted in 2005 with two shiny new hosts, John Turturro and Mr. Gregg Wallace. Spoiler, neither of them have their job anymore. It has been on the air for 2 decades. 50 versions air globally. It is seen in over 200 territories worldwide. This is a pretty big deal of a show. And for anyone who's not in the UK, just to let you know that this is one of those flagship TV shows on the BBC. Now, everything was seemingly swimming along nicely until 2011, which is when Kirsty Walk, who was a Newsnight host, appeared on MasterChef. Now, again, for those of you that don't know, Newsnight's like a pretty hard-hitting politics and news show, and the presenters don't pull any punches when they're talking to politicians, and they can stand their ground. Kirsty Walk is a strong woman. Now, she has since said that she enjoyed her time on MasterChef, but that the fly in the ointment on occasions was Gregg Wallace. The first time we were subjected to an inappropriate story, he came in and launched into a soliloquy, essentially, a story of sexually inappropriate nature about his now former wife. I was angry because I thought, this is just not on. We were essentially a captive audience for him. It's not totally clear when Kirsty brought up her concerns to producers. One would assume it was at the time of filming, but as you'll see, this is not when allegations initially came out. Then in 2012, Shannon Kyle, who was working with Gregg Wallace on her memoir, had some not so nice interactions with him. And this is to give you an idea of the types of things that he's accused of saying.
So this is what Gregg Wallace said to me in a restaurant. If you won't let me sleep with you, would you lick my arse? And after rejecting his advances he said I should keep an open mind and he'd keep his clean next time. When I was out eating dinner with him one day, I had eaten mess for dessert. And while I was eating this, he suddenly asked me, "What would you think if I put some of the eaten mess you're eating on my then?"
Oh my God. So how did you react when he said those things?
Well, I mean, when he asked about the eaten mess, I actually said, "I think you look pretty stupid." I mean, what I really wanted to do was just push the eaten mess across the table and let it land in his lap and walk out and never see him again. These words were said to me, they literally made my stomach curl. You know, I was literally just like, they're almost like little grenades, word grenades, you know, that I think are designed to humiliate. And I think that saying them aloud, you know, almost feels shameful. But I want to point out that I want to now pass that shame back to the person who actually said them.
Fast forward to 2017, and this is when formal complaints were raised. And then following that, a formal warning was given to Gregg Wallace. Now, subsequently, the report has come out that has said that 94% of the allegations against Wallace happened between 2005 and 2017. Or 2018, which I do think is interesting because I think that that shows that somebody has the capability to shift. Didn't completely stop the behaviour, doesn't make everything that happened before that okay, but it does tell us that the organisation stepped in and the allegations went down. Now we fast forward, way forward from 2018 to 2024, the end of 2024. And this is when it all blew up about the public allegations of inappropriate sexualized behaviour from Wallace. On the 28th of November, it was announced that Wallace had stepped away from his role at MasterChef whilst a formal investigation was conducted into his behaviour. At that time, BBC News reports that 13 people across a range of different shows and over a 17-year period had told them about inappropriate sexual comments from Wallace. And that included the allegation from Kirsty Walk. Now, another unsuspecting character pops in at this time. Sir Rod Stewart, yeah, Maggie May fame, may have seen him at Glastonbury. He accused Wallace of humiliating his wife, Penny Lancaster, when she was on the Celebrity MasterChef show. And Geordie Shore star, Charlotte Crosby. This really is a rundown of like very British characters here. Those of you who aren't in the UK, you're getting an insight of what life really is like here. Charlotte Crosby said that Gregg Wallace was extremely unpleasant to her when she was on MasterChef. Another daytime TV favourite from the UK, Kirsty Allsopp, worked with him on a pilot for a different show, and she said, and she talked about why you don't necessarily speak out or speak up at the time, or maybe you don't even report at the time. She said, it's because you feel in no particular order embarrassed, a prude, shocked, waiting for a male colleague to call him out, not wanting to rock the boat, thinking it's better to plough on with the day, assuming you misheard, misunderstood, or you just don't get the joke. And I think a lot of us who've been in these kind of situations understand a lot of those feelings. And it's just too much. You just don't do anything. You freeze because there's so much going on. Then on the 29th of November, this is when Downing Street steps in. You remember, because this is a BBC production, and the BBC is a public service here in the UK, then of course the government's going to start getting involved if they think it's a big deal. Although it's not lost on me that the BBC are one of the characters in this story and not necessarily the one that comes out with the best light. So this is also why the government are stepping in. And a spokesperson said that the matter is deeply concerning, adding that it is right that a thorough investigation is conducted. On the 30th of November, we're now a week into these things being public knowledge. The production company for MasterChef, called Banijay UK, and I say this production company purchased MasterChef when they bought Endemol, which the company that was running MasterChef prior to that, back in 2020. So actually a lot of these allegations are pre-Banijay UK days. So they announced that they'd appointed a law firm called Lewis Silkin to investigate the complaints. At the same time, a clip was going around and going viral of when Katie Brand was on MasterChef, in which Gregg Wallace aimed an innuendo-laden remark at her. I'm not even gonna... Here is that remark. I don't want to say it. Ugh. Feels like dirty to even have some of these words like coming out of my mouth. On the 1st of December, Gregg Wallace probably did the thing that is going to put him in the worst light through all of this, and says a lot about what was actually going on. He posted a video to Instagram and he said that all the accusations had come from middle-class women of a certain age. I don't know, perhaps insinuating that, like, there's all these middle-class women with pitchforks, they're just out to get him. I don't know what it was, that it was women who are deemed to be kind of soft and couldn't kind of handle his kind of jokes, whatever. I don't know what this was all about. He also claimed that absolutely nobody that he'd worked with on the show had made complaints about him, but we do know that some of the people that he has worked with are some of the people that are making complaints. So whether or not they were ones that made formal complaints, I don't know. But we do know that Kirsty Walk made a complaint about him, and that was to do with him in a professional environment. That was somebody who was working with him. So I don't know what that was all about. So on the 2nd of December, the day after he made this statement, Downing Street steps back in again. And the culture secretary, Lisa Nandy, said that his response was inappropriate and misogynistic. Yes, thank you. Wallace did then step up and apologise for his remarks. He said he was now going to take some time out. Probably should have done that sooner. He added, I wasn't in a good headspace when I posted it. I've been under a huge amount of stress, a lot of emotion. I felt very alone, under siege yesterday when I posted it. Oh boy. We don't post when we're in those emotional states. On the 3rd of December, 2 pre-recorded shows, MasterChef shows, got cancelled. This was right before Christmas. There were some Christmas specials, and the celebrities that were due to be in those shows were informed that the shows weren't going to be on the air. I'm sure they probably didn't need to hear the explanations at this point because the media circus was insane. Also, a former presenter, Melanie Sykes, said that she had a jaw-dropping interaction with Wallace that actually made her decide to quit TV. On the 4th of December, Wallace's co-host, John Turode, said in a social media post that he loved being part of MasterChef and that he will continue to be a part of it. Does anyone want to tell him? Now, we fast forward several months to the 9th of July. So everyone went away, their Christmas dinners, rang in the new year. Hopefully had some thinking and convalescing time. And on the 9th of July, Wallace said that he'd been sacked as the MasterChef presenter following the investigation and the report that had come out, or that was due to come out, about the investigation. However, he said that he won't go quietly. Come on, read the room. Read the room. Autistic, putting room. In an Instagram post, Wallace claimed that he had been cleared of the most serious and sensational allegations. He also said that he recognised that some of his humour and language was inappropriate at times. He also said, my neurodiversity, now formally diagnosed as autism, was suspected and discussed by colleagues across countless seasons of MasterChef, yet nothing was done to investigate my disability or protect me from what I now realise was a dangerous environment for over 20 years. Just gonna leave that for now. On the 11th of July, this is when we saw the letter of dismissal, and this said he'd made inappropriate jokes and was told in 2019 that he would get the sack if his behaviour didn't improve, according to the Sunday Times. On the 14th of July, the law firm Lewis Silkin finally released the report. This said that a total of 45 out of 83 allegations were upheld, and that did include one allegation of unwanted physical contact. It said that the majority of allegations substantiated involved inappropriate sexual language and humour. It also said that a smaller number of allegations involved him being in a state of undress. And in the media, many of his friends have said this is because of his autism, because he is sensitive to having materials on his body. Yeah, We still wear trousers to work. I've got to say, mate, you should get a pair of these. I don't know if you can see them, but I'm currently wearing silk combat trousers. You can barely feel them, they're great. Maybe that could work for you. But yeah, we don't go pantless. In the wake of these findings, Banijay Productions said that Wallace's return to MasterChef was untenable. Of course, Wallace came out and said he was deeply sorry for any hurt caused, and he said that a late autism diagnosis has helped me understand how I communicate and how I'm perceived, adding, I'm still learning. Now that resonates a lot with me. I understand what it is to be going through that. I was only diagnosed 2 years ago. There is a lot of self-examination, self-learning to do as you go through that process. It's not easy. Nobody's saying that that part of it is easy, and you do almost feel like you're starting from scratch again. So let's start from scratch. Just to round off this brief history, as of where we are today, the BBC confirmed that John Turode, the other presenter, has also been sacked from MasterChef because of allegations of a racist comment. And now he is pursuing legal action against the BBC for unfair dismissal. This video is not about John Turode. Okay, I know that was a lot of background, and I'm very, very happy that you stuck with me through all of that, because we need that context to now be able to step in and do the analysis. So if you are still with me, let me know in the comments. Let me know what you think of this situation, if you've had any particular thoughts, and let's get on with it. So first of all, I just wanted to quickly talk about some of the initial responses to the report. Of course, things kicked off on Twitter, and I still can't call it X. Things kicked off on X, and a lot of people, especially those who are autistic, were getting very frustrated that kind of autism and inappropriate behaviour at work was getting conflated, saying this is just going to put autistic people in a bad light, in an unfairly bad light, and just as I was saying at the beginning, putting these two things together, it's not fair. In addition, Jessie Hewitson, who is autistic and works for a company that trains companies in supporting neurodiverse employees, said, I don't make any connection between alleged behaviour and autism. We support companies in supporting their neurodivergent employees. Common scenarios we encounter with autistic people are often that they may say things in a direct way which might offend colleagues. For example, there might be heightened anxiety around something that's changed at work, and to other colleagues it can look like the autistic person is being very difficult when really, potentially, they're just very stressed. These are the kind of common misunderstandings you encounter. We've never encountered someone coming to us for the types of allegations that are going on here. Now, I want to say that whilst those things are probably common, what is described there to me sounds like somebody who's not really masking very much. Whereas somebody who is masking and mirroring, you may end up kind of feeling like you're going with the vibes of conversation and this is what's done, when actually you're overstepping lines that you might not realise are there. So we will go into that in more detail as I go through the analysis of this. But I just wanted to point it out right now. And of course, if this organisation has never encountered this, but to me, that was just my initial response to reading this response. Jessie added, it's also making a mockery of the whole diagnosis of autism. You're saying that if somebody's got autism, they're going to get a free pass to inappropriately behave with women or men. Yeah, like that's kind of the crux of what is going on here in terms of why everybody's feeling so frustrated with what was said. I should also say that the Lewis Silkin report said that investigators noted that the autism diagnosis was highly relevant, particularly in understanding the difficulties in reading social cues and the use of humour as a masking technique. Yes, and we'll go on to why that's not quite satisfactory. So I'm ready to put my analysis on this situation, and this really comes in two parts. One part is about an individual who has had inappropriate behaviour in the workplace, and what I think is going on there with the lens of autism, and then the other part is about the organisation and an organisation's responsibility to build cultures that support all people. So let's start with the individual. The scenario here is that there is behaviour from somebody who is in a position of power. Now, he doesn't always perceive himself to be in a position of power, but the reality is he is the host on a very, very well-known show. He is publicly known. He has a degree of fame. That in itself gives you a degree of power. He's one of the more senior people who's going to be on that set when they are there. He's part of the talent. And so cutting straight to the heart of all of this, this person who was in a position of power was allowed to get away with, and did get away with, saying inappropriate things for a really, really long time. They were wrong because they said those things, regardless of whether or not that had anything to do with autism or misreading social cues. It's still wrong to do it. And what's very telling to me is the response to the allegations. Because you can say, oh, I didn't know, I didn't realise, I didn't know that this was something that you don't do, I'm not good with social cues. But then your response to the allegations was to fight back at those that you had made to feel uncomfortable in the workplace. The comment of middle-class women of a certain age were his only accusers just rings of misogyny, and there's actually several reasons why those women are the ones who were making these complaints. Richard Osmond on The Rest Is Entertainment actually said it really, really well.
Okay, well, he said that all the complaints are coming from middle-class women of a certain age. Okay, so he has absolutely successfully guaranteed he will be the main character of next week as well. There's a lot to say about that particular comment, so we might as well dive in there.
Firstly, women, well, yes, it's largely going to be women because that's who you're making your sexualised comments and sexualised behaviour to. Middle-aged, middle class, yes, because they can afford to call you out. And a lot of people, junior people, can't afford to call you out. And if you think that middle-aged, middle-class women are snowflakes, they are. Middle-aged, middle-class women who work in television are the least snowflakey people I've ever met in my entire life because they've grown up in a system where they've had to put up with so much bullshit. We're certainly living in a culture where he could ride out what happened because it sounds like, by and large, most of the allegations are of, verbal, tiresome sexual banter, almost non-stop tiresome verbal sexual banter. And there'll be people who, in lots of workplaces up and down the country who will recognise that sort of character and how boring and tiresome it is. There is a world in which in 6 months' time people will let that go, and because nothing illegal has happened and Gregg can come back. The second you come out and say, no, I'm being persecuted, you do have to take your medicine here. He clearly, this is a pattern of behaviour over a very long time, and people from different shows and people from different, levels on those different shows have said the same thing about it. It's clearly a personality quirk of his. It's clearly something that, he needs to work through with somebody, and he has inflicted that on a production for years and years and years. But, just go and get a bit of therapy and come back and do something else. But now this, going on Instagram and blaming the people who are complaining, that is sort of beyond the pale, and that makes it very, very, very difficult to come back from.
Thank you, Richard. That gives me a very nice segue into talking about playing the blame game. Whenever I see somebody that's all about blaming other people or blaming situations, I know that they are stuck in the negative power paradigm, and I will explain what that is. So in this particular situation, there was a lot of blaming different things. Autism. Okay, he did say he wasn't blaming the autism, and yet he was still saying, autism is one of the reasons I did a lot of this stuff. Blaming the middle-class women of a certain age. He also said there's no space for working-class men in the BBC. Blaming the fact that he has come from a working-class background. Blaming the organisation. Now, I don't think they're blameless, but his whole response has been to be outward, blaming other people. He has this big chip on his shoulder, and to me it sounds like he almost still feels like he's at the bottom of the food chain. But guess what? You're not Gregg Wallace. You were not at the bottom of the food chain. You had made your way in your career. The BBC has no space for working class men. Well, actually, you'd been there for 20 years. Maybe you didn't always feel comfortable, but you were actually one of the most powerful people in the room. And what I see as the issue here is this idea, like I said, the negative power paradigm. It's when people think about power as something that either you've got over other people or other people have over you. There's only two choices in this particular scenario, which is either I'm at the top or somebody else is at the top. And that in order for you to remain at the top, you've got to step over other people. You've got to put them down. That's what I'm seeing a lot of in this particular story. Now, there is a much better way that I call the positive power paradigm. And that is where we build within ourselves and then we build power with others. So we end up greater than the sum of our parts. And we build that power through self-examination, through learning, through development, through connection with the wider world. So everything I've seen here has kind of indicated that certainly at many points in time, that Gregg Wallace was in a place where his mindset was one that wasn't very helpful. It felt like it was very fixed, that he's quicker to blame others than he is to go within and do his personal development. He lashed out because his ego got damaged, because his reputation got damaged. And I get it, like his professional identity was taken away from him. That can't be easy. When we find ourselves in difficult situations, we have choices. And he made one that was to lash out at others. And that's not autism that causes you to blame others. Not just others, like literally those that you had caused discomfort to. I think that his inability to take responsibility and face the hard stuff is actually the biggest issue on the individual side of things. It really blows my mind that somebody at the age of 60 has really never had to do that development or hold that mirror up to themselves. It feels like he hadn't been forced to confront his behavior or change his mindset. Like even though there was that complaint back, or even though he had his warning back in 2019. And don't get me wrong, like I understand what it feels like to want to blame others or to have your ego bruised. I've got to be real. Like for me, it was like in my teens, in my early 20s, real life comes in and you're forced to see yourself as you are and you're forced to do professional development. I wonder if this is a case of somebody actually doing pretty well and getting their own way for too long and not having to face their own behavior. But it's okay. We're never too late to stop developing. So I still have faith. Keep growing, keep learning. So one thing that Gregg Wallace did say was, it wasn't until 7 years ago that I had a massive wake-up call and realised the loud, energetic, greengrocer persona that I was on the telly was maybe becoming redundant. So I changed. I honestly never meant to upset anyone. I thought I was going in every day and just delivering what was wanted. I didn't realise I was causing any problems. Now, if you go back to one of my videos, I think it was probably on the DSM-5 or something to do with autism criteria or kind of common traits of autism, there are some things in there that say, like, have there been times in your past when people have like distanced themselves from you, but you haven't really known why? And I can remember when I did my assessment saying that, yeah, there were like 2 or 3 times that I remember somebody like suddenly just being like, oh, that person really just doesn't want to ever hang out with you or ever see you ever again. And that indicates to me that I probably had times that I said things when I honestly was not meaning to hurt anybody, but I obviously did. So yes, this can happen, but again, we mature, we evolve, we grow. This is not the kind of thing that's happened to me in the near past. This is 20 years ago. So I'm really not going to feel sorry for Gregg Wallace through this, even if I do believe, yeah, he never meant to hurt anybody. He was just trying to get by. He was just doing his job. But you did hurt people, and you had plenty of money, plenty of access to help. You had a career that most of us can't even dream of. You understand that only 3 in 10 autistic people even are in work. Like, come on. And there is something about this statement that I also want to call out a little bit, because what he says is this greengrocer persona was becoming redundant, so it was changed. So to me, that also sounds like it was very much to do with public perception, and therefore there was a change, rather than it being a kind of deeper inner evaluation of, oh, this isn't okay, I need to change. Which does bring me on nicely to my good friend Stephen Fry, if only, right? Who spoke about understanding others.
It was obviously unbelievably foolish of Gregg Wallace to make that video over the weekend. It really showed that he simply wasn't understanding. And, you know, even if he felt that he'd been misunderstood himself, he could surely see that there were some women there who were truly hurt and had felt not listened to, and that he should first of all address that.
So it appears that Gregg Wallace cannot put himself in the shoes of others. So we think of this, I guess, as lacking in empathy, and this is something that is very related to autism. There is a perception that autistic people are lacking in empathy, but that perception is a little bit flawed. And in order for me to explain that, I want to do just a little bit of a masterclass on empathy. There are actually two types of empathy, affective and cognitive. Cognitive empathy is defined as the ability to explicitly understand the thoughts, intentions and feelings of other people using inferential, so being able to infer from information, or imaginative, so using your imagination, processes, which include processes such as taking the perspective or role of the other. In contrast, affective empathy is defined as experiencing an emotional state that consists in feeling another person's emotions. When I first found out about this, it was actually really important for me because I felt like autistic individuals can and do experience empathy, particularly affective empathy. Particularly affective empathy. If I tell you from my point of view, and I'm going to give an example, this might be a crazy example, I don't know. But so cognitive empathy, I'm going to take the example of motherhood. So I have never wanted to be a mother, but I know many other people out there do. When I was younger, I really didn't get it. And that might have even caused me to be insensitive about certain things, like why people found, like any if people were having trouble, for example, having kids, like just really not understanding it and probably not being very empathetic about that because I didn't get it. Like I couldn't understand what it was to be in that person's shoes of like wanting to be a mother. But over the years, as I've got much more mature, as I've developed, as I've seen other people tell their stories, now I understand, even though I don't feel it, like I don't think I'll ever feel that feeling of, God, I really would want, but I do understand that other people feel that way. And so even though I probably won't get that cognitive empathy fully, I do have an understanding that other people feel that way and therefore I can be sensitive to them, even though if I can't be like fully empathetic with them. On the other hand, affective empathy, I think of that more about kind of feeling the energy of people and taking on the energy of people. And I am hypersensitive to that. And I think a lot of autistic people are hypersensitive to that. And so much so that other people feeling something can be very overstimulating. And so you're feeling so strongly what they're feeling that then you may not be able to be there for them in the way that you want to be. And that might mean that my responses come across as non-empathetic, but that doesn't mean I'm not actually feeling empathy with that person. So I think it's really important that we don't oversimplify autism of having a lack of empathy. And we have to be more nuanced in the way that we think about this, because it's not true that autistic people can't have any empathy, can't care about other people, can't put themselves in the shoes of other people. They just have their own emotional experiences and their own ways to connect with what other people are going through. I suspect in this particular case, based on obviously no real knowledge of what's going on, that the actual issue here is going back to playing the blame game and in the negative power paradigm. It might be the case that Gregg Wallace really can't get his head around why people would care about being exposed to these inappropriate stories that he tells at work. It might be that he feels like the punishment is bigger than the crime. But to me, what I'm seeing is he's so focused on his own situation, and certainly in those times where he's lashed out and kind of reacted publicly in very quick timescales, that it wouldn't even occur to him to put himself into other people's shoes. He's fighting his own corner, and as an autistic person, we feel a lot, and I can understand that, going through a lot of very strong feelings, but it's made the public perception even worse, when probably just going within and examining himself further would have been a much better step when all of this came out. I also want to quickly mention here that there are reports that he had no sense of irony, talking like an American person, irony or humour. And of course those things are also associated with being autistic, and there are many arguments that say that autistic people absolutely can get irony and humour. The next thing I want to talk about is that, again, still looking at the individual, he seems to maybe have a misunderstanding of the seriousness of the behaviour, even now. In his report, he spoke about being cleared of the most serious allegations. Now, again, I can kind of understand where that's coming from, because I think there were a lot more legal implications with some of those more serious allegations. So I'm sure he was relieved that this perhaps is not going to be a big legal battle, although I don't know. And they haven't been explicit about what all of these different allegations are. But I still don't, I just keep thinking he just doesn't grasp like how serious their behaviour is. Just some silly jokes, just some silly stories. Someone who's been on the other side of this. And I guess that, you know, maybe you'd put this in the category of microaggressions, although some of the things sound like they were a lot more than micro. As a woman, as an autistic woman, I don't know, like, as the person that I am, going to work has felt incredibly unsafe. And it's been because of things like this. It starts with like that feeling of creepiness or ickiness. And for some people, like Kirsty Walk, might be a fly in the ointment of an otherwise good experience. But for many of us, work isn't an otherwise good experience. It's not just one person saying these things. It's not just one type of challenge that's going on. And this guy was somebody who was in the spotlight with perceived power. Someone who was actually setting the culture of an organization. And if you feel unsafe within the culture of your organization, your ability to show up and do your work is going to be severely hindered. And it's not only going to impact your working life, it's going to impact your life far beyond that. We'll talk a little bit more about this when we come on to talking about the organizations. Next thing, likability goes a long way. Likability is something I think about a lot in the workplace. I actually think it's something that has benefited me. I think people see me as likable. I think that also has come from masking, because I'm really a horrible person otherwise, no. And I actually wouldn't change a lot of the things I do. I do think there's a flip side to the likability as well, because I think if people see you as being all like happy and friendly and nice, they also then think your credibility's lower. It's not, but people perceive it in that way. Like, it seems that Gregg Wallace was kind of not a very likable person, although some reports do say he kind of put people at ease and his humour went down quite well. A lot of things also said he wasn't very likable and people didn't seem to like him sometimes. He rubbed a lot of people up the wrong way. And this is what got me thinking about, does this mean that people are less likely to excuse the awkward stories, the inappropriate stories, if they kind of already feel a bit weird around him anyway? We know that, like, from the research, that autistic adults are consistently rated by non-autistic adults as being more awkward and less likable than their non-autistic peers, even when non-autistic raters were not informed of the diagnosis. So this idea that, like, people might not know that you're autistic, but they immediately think, oh, there's something weird there. It's awkward. And the non-autistic adults have then had a disinclination to interact with those autistic adults. So there are difficult things that go on, and if somebody is perceived to be not likable and other people don't want to interact with them, they're going to do things to kind of make people want to interact with them, like tell silly jokes. So I do think we're kind of perpetuating another autistic reality here, and a challenge that autistic people are up against. This is why we do mask. We just have to learn, and we should learn pretty quickly, what aspects of masking are actually appropriate for the workplace. I've talked to many autistic people now, and the idea isn't to just take off the mask, because if people don't want to interact with us, then there's going to be even more social exclusion that we face. So I can understand where, like, some of this is coming from, just not the full nature of it. And it does seem that a lot of people found Gregg Wallace pretty dislikable. So I came across this video, which was Sean Locke, who is a comedian that I find like super funny. Unfortunately, he died a few years ago. He seems to have a very big dislike for Gregg Wallace.
Now, this guy, Gregg Wallace. Gregg came close because I like him because he wears a hairnet, even though he's bald. Yeah, he goes to a crisp factory, puts on a hairnet. What, is he worried some baldness will get in the crisp? No, I like him because he's got no sense of irony or humour. He was very close to getting through, but I've met him.
I always used to like watching Sean Locke, but he has also made sexualized comments to his co-stars on air. I think that he already had kind of more of a relationship with those people, and not a sexual relationship, but just a relationship. But also, he very quickly, like in the moment, apologized. So I think something else that may be standing against autistic people is that there is a processing piece that goes on, and there is a time lag sometimes. So we might say something and then we don't immediately pick up on it, and so that can be problematic sometimes as well. But like I said, through all of this, through everything I've said about the individual, you can still learn, you can still grow. These are not things that should stay the same over periods of 17 years, however long it was. Now let's shine a bit of a light on the organisation. I pulled on a really great article that was written by Gabby Hinsliff in the Guardian as I was researching this. And I should say, obviously I'll link this article in the description. It was written before the report came out, so it does talk about some of the more serious allegations. And so to quote Gabby, agents, employers, board members all have a moral and legal duty to make people behave decently. If not now, when? So I go back in all of this to be like, I think the major problem in everything is that somebody in a position of power was allowed to get away with behaviour for a long time. So unchecked behaviour from the organisation and from other people in positions of power. In my opinion, this whole story is a problem of unchecked privilege in the workplace. 94% of these complaints happened between 2005 and 2018. This means that once the allegations were escalated in 2017, the behaviour changed. So even though there were incidents since then, that does indicate a big change after that warning was given. Now, I am sure that there were little chats that went on before that time. I hope there were, but it wasn't a formal warning from the organisation until after that period of time. So it was the formal warning that instigated that change. Which, you know, again, intrinsic, extrinsic, sticks rather than carrots. This person was responding more to the extrinsic than the intrinsic motivators. But as an organisation, you have both of those tools at your disposal. Now, I don't want to diminish any of the behaviour of the individual, but this shows that the organisation had a power to make a change. It could have made a change much, much earlier. And all too often, I see cowardly behaviour in people in positions of power within organisations. All they need to do is say something. All they need to do is step up. All they need to do is push through some of the processes a little bit more quickly, and not just bend to the will of like organisational structures that happen to be in place. You have to step up and you have to fight against any structures that are holding up bad behaviour. The problem is, so many people who make it to the top in these organisations are those who are very good at towing the party line, so to speak. They're very good at working within the systems that exist. They're not good at disrupting those systems, and they're not good at standing up when change needs to be made for the good of others and for the whole culture across the organisation. And to me, what that means is they do not have the skills required to be in leadership roles in these organisations. And in many cases, they don't have the character to be good leaders either. Now, this trickles down to middle management as well, and that creates an overall bad culture. And those who are willing to play the power games benefit from this. Those who are happy to step on others and to make other people's life harder, they benefit from these structures. But those who are hardworking, earnest, genuinely want to make an impact, and those with skills that they want to put into practice without having to always play politics, they are the ones, and particularly autistic people, are kept out of the workplace. I hold organisations to account, and I hold people in leadership positions to account, because you should have the skills that you need. And if you don't, step down and let somebody else step in. I know you won't. I know your salary is far too tasty. We have to stop accepting people in positions of power who do not have the skills to do everything they need to do in their job, which includes creating cultures that make working safe for other people. Okay, the next thing here in terms of the organisation is about holding people on the pedestal. It's kind of what I've just talked about in some ways. Like once people have got to a certain stage, everybody then kind of bows to them like they're some kind of god. In Gabby's article, she said, people mostly do what they can get away with, and those who make a fortune for their employers or shareholders are often allowed to get away with way too much. And this is another great point. But the misconception here is that this cash cow is the only one that's going to make you a ton of money. There are plenty of other people who could step in as the so-called energetic greengrocer persona without making inappropriate comments, who could still make an organisation a lot of money. The myth of the troubled genius is what is at fault here. Guess what? There are plenty of non-problematic people who could do a great job if given a hosting job on a popular BBC show. And I'm sure they wouldn't mind raking in the big bucks too. Did I tell you Gregg Wallace was on 400 grand a year? The next thing that the organisation can do better is to uphold a culture of reporting and a culture where people stand up and speak out against bad behaviour. So it is clear here that either reporting didn't happen, or that if it did, it really wasn't escalated for a very long time. One person who reported an incident was told by somebody else who was more senior to them in their role that they were over 16, so they're not being Jimmy Savilled. Anyone in the UK will know what it means to be Jimmy Savilled. If not, I will find an article that explains who Jimmy Savile is, and that will be in the description as well. And it is the last thing that somebody wants to hear when they are reporting an incident. Just because you're over 16, just because you're over the age of consent, doesn't mean that you have to experience inappropriate sexual language and behaviours when you are at work. It's not okay at any age. It's also worth pointing out that in the TV world, there are a lot of freelancers. So most of these people aren't necessarily protected by being salaried, being on payroll, and kind of the benefits that come with being employed in an organisation. So they are really trying to hold on to those opportunities when they come along. They're not going to necessarily speak up if it then means that they don't have a job next season. Now that obviously also applies to people who are on payroll. If you feel like your job is at risk, if you feel like your salary, your livelihood, your ability to pay your bills, to support your family is at risk for speaking up, then you're not going to do it. And it sounds like this was something that was going on in this organisation. The fact people weren't reporting until others came out, and the fact that actually junior people didn't really report until later on, shows that there was not a culture that people felt safe to do that in. That's on the organisation, that's on the leadership. And then finally, in terms of the organisation, and this is something that Gregg Wallace said, not enough support for neurodivergent people in the workplace. Talk about stating the obvious. Gregg Wallace said that he did not receive enough support from the BBC following his diagnosis. Join the club. This is what every single neurodivergent person who is lucky enough to have a job, I'm not saying that, you know what I mean, because a lot of people don't. You deserve to, a lot of people don't. Every neurodivergent person feels like they need more support to thrive at work. Corporate cultures are flawed in many ways, and the irony here, now I don't know if you'll get that if you're watching this and you're autistic, because obviously we don't get irony. Is that a double irony? That word sounds so weird every time I say it. It is people like Gregg Wallace, people in positions of power, that make people feel shame and humiliation. It's behaviour that crosses lines that often makes the workplace feel like hell for neurodivergent people. And the types of things that are known to help neurodivergent people in the workplace, things like clarity of expectations, rules, clarity about what is and isn't tolerated in the workplace. If these things had been in place in this organisation, then dozens of people would not have been subjected to the inappropriate language, the inappropriate behaviour. And I guess this is the point that Gregg Wallace is trying to make. but it's very clumsy, and he's probably not the one to make it in this particular situation. But what he's saying is the BBC should have saved him from himself, and that would have saved all the other people from himself too. He's not wrong, and like I said, I think there are definitely times when I've been in the workplace where I feel like I wish that it was clearer what those rules were. That it gets very confusing during some of those social conversations. Something else that Gabby Hinsliff said was there is no substitute for managers or board members actually managing, drawing red lines around what is acceptable and then enforcing it from top to bottom so that everyone, no matter how senior or junior, how good or bad at reading a room, knows where they stand. Yes, Gabby! Which goes with one of my central tenets of workplace design. If you centre neurodivergent individuals, then you are more likely to design a workplace that works for everyone. Woo! Okay, I now want to take us right back to the beginning. It's kind of a central question in this, which is, can people change? So as I already said, in the dismissal letter, Claire Powell said, I've taken into account whether or not your behaviour could be improved with training and or coaching. And I do not have the confidence that you can change what seems to be learned behaviour. I get it, that has to be like dismissal speak, right? They had to say what they had to say. Like it was no longer appropriate for him to work there. But as I said, like this hit me really hard because this idea that, I mean, it definitely goes against any of my principles to think that anyone can't be changed with the right support, the right training. But I can't help, because autism's been brought up so much in all of this, to ask the question, can autistic people override their coping mechanisms? Because that's kind of what we're talking about, right? She said the learned behaviour, in order to stay away from that bad behaviour. So I thought I'd put myself in this position, right? So say that I, as an autistic person, found myself in the incredibly difficult position of being a household name in the UK, earning 400 grand base salary a year, and an accidental compulsion to tell inappropriate stories in the workplace. Yeah, say I found myself in that position. What would I do differently? Jeez, Wallace, none of this is okay. Like, come on. You had such a good life. You still do. Nobody earning 400k a year should have a problem with getting fired. You should be able to support yourself still. Now I want to bring up something that I've been alluding to for ages. The reality is that I have found myself in the workplace, laughing along with others, bantering with others. Maybe there was some innuendo. Like, I hear that kind of thing all the time in the workplace. That line between like how you would speak to friends and how you would speak in a professional environment gets incredibly blurred. And on top of that, I think that we are all told in the workplace that, guess what, if the more you build relationships with people that you work with, like, the easier it's going to be to get on in your career. And actually, that has been proven to be true in my career. And so frankly, I get very confused about what is acceptable and what isn't. And there have definitely been times when I have been mirroring behaviour, where I've been swept up in water cooler chat, and God knows what I said. You know, like when you are mirroring like that, I feel like you don't even know what is kind of coming out of your mouth. You're responding to what other people are doing, and because this is part of the coping mechanism, it's really hard to know. And like I said, there have been times in my past when people have said that I've done like that I've alienated someone else. I don't know why. It's been a long time, and I like to think that maybe I'm still a bit on top of it. But the reality is, even in the last couple of weeks, I had a situation where I kind of misread. I mean, there were no consequences from this situation, thankfully, and I don't think I upset anyone. But maybe I did, and maybe I. But I misread the kind of tone in the room and kind of went with it. And I don't like that, because to me, actually, I'd rather go to work and get on with the work. I'd rather have conversations about the work. That's more interesting to me than any of these other things that might be said. But that hasn't stopped me from having those conversations going on around me, and therefore engaging in conversations. Now, I'd like to think that none of those conversations are, well, no, actually, I've definitely have been the recipient of a lot of lewd remarks over the years, for sure, in the workplace. But one of the differences, even if I've made, like I said, I've said things, maybe I don't even remember what I've said in certain situations, and maybe there's other situations when I've come home and I've gone, oh, that just felt icky. Like, I didn't like having that conversation. I didn't like using my time in that way. And so when I realise that things aren't appropriate, aren't professional, aren't helping to achieve my career goals and the impact I want to make, I shift. I change my behaviour. I go, oh, okay, I didn't like that. Takes me a while to process, of course, but then once I have processed, I make a shift. And let's be real, like, the kind of chat I'm talking about is not the same as the chat we were hearing in some of these videos. And that's also not forgetting the fact that I sit a lot lower on the totem pole than one of the fairly well-known people in the UK media. One thing that does happen with me, and maybe this is something that was going on, and I think perhaps because of some of the comments this is what was going on, is I often perceive that I sit lower on the totem pole than maybe my job title alludes to. I still feel like a child a lot of the time at work, and I'm 43 years old and I've been a CEO twice and been a founder. I'd love to know if that's something that you experience as well as an autistic person. Like, do you still feel more childlike than those around you? It's something that I've heard, and it's something that I definitely experience for myself. And maybe that's related to our feeling of like not belonging, even if maybe you were in a leadership role. Let me know. Yeah, just drop it in the comments. So I've definitely felt vulnerable. I've felt less than when I've been in the workplace. And sometimes that will mean that I act a certain way in order to please other people. And there's not time to go into this. I know we're already like a long way deep into this video. But I do tend to put other people on a pedestal. And in the past, that will have led to mirroring their behaviour, when in reality, their behaviour is not actually that good. And when I say good, I might mean like inappropriate, but I also might mean they're not that good at their job. Their behaviour in their job is not actually that good, and that my skills and the way I would carry out things might actually be stronger than theirs. But I tend to kind of fall back into this mirroring kind of space because I put other people up on that pedestal. And as I mentioned, the kind of chip on the shoulder that I think that Gregg Wallace kind of carries a little bit here, and I think that I also carry a chip on my shoulder, where other people might perceive me to be in a position of power or to be quite powerful, but I'm not feeling that way, and therefore the way I act is responding to that. But does any of that mean that people can't change? Well, first of all, we have to remember that autism is not one size fits all. For some, learning and development is a difficult thing to do, especially in traditional learning environments. But autism is not a learning disability, and many autistic people are incredibly hungry to develop new skills and new knowledge. Most of the autistic people I know go over and above when it comes to learning and development. And let's not forget, the majority of autistic people still don't have a job. We compare that to the juicy BBC salary and position that Gregg Wallace has. Some of us may have different learning styles and require bespoke approaches to learning. And some autistic people will have comorbidities, which means that there are further learning challenges. We have different strengths and weaknesses, we have our spiky skills profiles, which also might correlate to things that are related to social and communication. But Gregg Wallace has access and means to highly bespoke personal development. If he'd have prioritised self-development sooner, and you want to say like with support from the organisation, yes, the organisation does bear some of this, so does he. If he'd have accessed that sooner, then this could have been a very different story. And honestly, like, if he couldn't have figured it out, then why does he not just give himself a rule of like, do not talk about eaten mess and genitalia with somebody that I work with? Now, I do actually have a very serious communication tip that works pretty well, and I think it could have worked for him in this situation. If you're feeling awkward, if you're trying to break the ice, ask a curiosity-driven question, and then focus on listening instead of talking. A host's job is a bit like a facilitator, right? One of the highest paid facilitators in the land. You can't do that basic job? Stop putting people without the skills they need to do their job, even if they are the greengrocer cheeky persona. The majority of autistic people are, as it's quite poignantly described in Gabby Hinscliffe's article, quietly exhausting themselves trying to decipher and comply with all the unspoken etiquette in office life. Most autistic people are working really, really hard just to get by. Most of us would have done anything to be in that kind of position, in that kind of job, to have that kind of financial security. So, deep breath. We've made it to the summary, people. This is a story about power. Those who have it, BBC, and those who don't. Those who think that power is a game of standing on others to get to where they want to go, who are willing to bully and humiliate in whatever way they need to in order to get to the top of organizations. And the organizations celebrating those people instead of recognizing that bad behavior is a lack of skill to do their job. So this is the part where I really want to hear from you. What does fair and ethical leadership look like? What does accountability look like when neurodivergence is in the mix? Let me know. So, no, autism is not an excuse for bad behavior. Autistic or not, you have a choice. Woman or man, you have a choice. Working class or born with a silver spoon in your mouth, you have a choice. You can focus on one-upmanship, bullying, blame, ego-driven power plays that diminish others to get you to the top of the ladder. Or you can focus on self-development, mastery of new skills, building connections to create something better. Even have the humility to step away if you know you are not yet equipped to do the job that you're being offered, or at least ask for the help that is required. You have the choice to gain your own power without diminishing others, to nurture that power within and that power with those around you. I know which one I'm choosing. How about you? Thank you for you who made it all the way to the end. If you have, I'm going to assume that you have enjoyed this, or that you've certainly found it informative. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, if you agreed, if you disagree, and what you'd like to see more of. I definitely want to do more of this kind of content. And if you did like it, don't forget to subscribe and press the bell so you can be notified when the next video comes out. I look forward to seeing you again soon.